So here's the thing about making video games, right? You can pour your heart and soul into creating something absolutely incredible, spend years of your life on it, and lose sleep over every little detail, and then it just does not sell, like at all. And that's gonna be the most crushing feeling in the world for the game developers behind it. Because making a great game and actually selling that game, those are two completely different beasts. You could have the best game ever made sitting on a shelf somewhere, but if nobody knows about it, or if it releases at the wrong time, or if the marketing team just absolutely fumbles the bag, well, you're screwed. And that's exactly what happened to some of these games we are talking about in this video. First game I want to talk about is Mirror's Edge. So picture this, it's 2008 and literally every single first-person game is just another generic first-person shooter. Well, not generic, but still. Call of Duty is there, Battlefield, everyone's got a gun and everyone's shooting everyone else. The whole genre was honestly kinda getting stale, you know? And then DICE comes out of nowhere and goes, hey, what if we made a first-person game where you don't shoot things? What if instead you just run around, do parkour, and look really cool doing it? And man, that was such a breath of fresh air. Mirror's Edge was like nothing else at the time. The game had this super clean aesthetic, all white buildings with these pops of red to show you where to go, and the whole free running movement system was so smooth and satisfying. When you nailed a sequence of wall runs and jumps perfectly, it felt amazing, like genuinely amazing. But here's the problem, it came out at a weird time, and most people didn't really know what to make of it. The game didn't sell great initially, but over time it became this cult classic. People started realizing, wait, this game was actually sick, and the demand for a sequel got pretty loud. So DICE listened and eventually gave us Mirror's Edge Catalyst in 2016. And they basically rebuilt the whole thing from scratch. They made it open world, added online features that actually worked, people were hyped, the trailers looked incredible. But then Overwatch happened. Yeah, Blizzard dropped Overwatch literally a month before Catalyst came out, and it just completely dominated everything. Obviously, it was the biggest thing in the gaming at that moment. Catalyst never stood a chance against it. I think the game ended up selling around 2.5 million copies, which, okay, let's be honest, sounds very decent until you realize that's the same as the original game sold. All that hype, all the development work, all those improvements, and it didn't move the needle at all. And to make things worse, they shut down the online services in 2023. The single player campaign still works, of course, but the multiplayer stuff, which was one of the main things about Catalyst as a sequel to Mirror's Edge and a huge part of what made Catalyst special, is just gone now. It's shut down forever. It's a shame because that multiplayer was genuinely really fun, and now new players will never get to experience it. Alright, so if you ever played Shadow of the Colossus, you know that Fumito is an absolute genius when it comes to emotional storytelling in games. So when The Last Guardian got announced at E3 2009, everyone lost their freaking minds. The trailer showed this kid with the massive creature called Trico, and the graphics looked insane for the time. The animations, the way the creature moved, the textures, everything looked next level. People were ready to call it Game of the Year before it even came out. And then nothing. Years went by, the game was supposed to come out in 2011, 2012 came and went, then 12, then 13, people started joking that it was never actually gonna come out. Folks thought that it was just a vaporware, development hell is a real thing, and The Last Guardian was living in it. But finally, in 2016, a full 7 years after it was announced, the game actually released. And well, surprisingly, you know what, the game was actually pretty good. The story was beautiful, the relationship between the kid and Trico all was emotional and well done, and the AI for Trico was genuinely impressive. The creature felt real, and actually a living thing alive working with you and your partner. But here's the thing, 7 years is an eternity in gaming. The people who were hyped in 2009 had moved on, they'd gotten older, their taste probably changed, played hundreds of other games, and I think that initial excitement had just evaporated. And while the game got decent reviews, it wasn't groundbreaking masterpiece people had built up in their heads over all those years. The game debuted at number 7 on the UK charts and kinda just stayed there. It never really climbed, never really caught fire the way everyone thought it would. All that hype, that anticipation, all those years of waiting, and it just quietly released to a collective shrug. That's gotta hurt for the developers who worked so hard on it. Man, I really thought Sunset Overdrive was gonna be huge. Like, this was supposed to be the game that sold Xbox Ones. It was really supposed to be a console seller title. Microsoft was banking on this thing. So Insomniac made this crazy, colorful, over-the-top game where you're grinding on rails, bouncing off cars, and shooting mutants that were created by a bad energy drink. Yes, really. The whole vibe was just pure fun, bright colors, snappy movement system, genuinely funny writing. It was like Tony Hawk meets Dead Rising with a punk rock attitude. The traversal system was incredible. Once you got the hang of chaining together grinds, wall runs, and bounces, you could fly through Sunset City without ever touching the ground. And the game rewarded you for staying in motion. Your combo multiplier would keep going up as long as you kept moving. It was addictive as hell. The reviews were great, everyone who played it loved it. This was supposed to be that killer exclusive game that convinced people to buy an Xbox One instead of a PS4. Microsoft was pushing it hard, but it only sold like 1.6 million copies something. Wait, actually 1.1 million copies, I think. That's pretty much it. Meanwhile, Sucker Punch's infamous Second Son, which came out the same year on PlayStation 4, sold more than that in its first 9 days. That was really embarrassing. So, what went wrong? Well, a lot of things. First off, Microsoft absolutely botched the Xbox One launch. They had that whole always online DRM disaster, the forced Kinect bundle that made it more expensive than the PS4. And they just completely fumbled their messaging. People were already skeptical about the Xbox One as a platform. And then the marketing for Sunset Overdrive itself was kind of confusing. Like, the trailer looked cool and flashy, but nobody really understood what the game was. Was it a shooter, a platformer, a comedy game? All of the above. Well, people didn't know about what they were buying. But oh well, the good thing now is that the game is available on PC. So I think it's also on Steam, so just check it out there. You can freely play it now. It's just a really good, fun single-player game, and I'm sure most of you will have a blast playing it now. Next is Okami. So Okami is straight up gorgeous. Like, even today, it's one of the most beautiful games ever made. The whole thing looks like a Japanese watercolor painting come to life, and it's just stunning to look at. You play as a white wolf, and the game is heavily inspired by Japanese mythology and folklore. The core mechanic is the celestial paintbrush. You can literally pause the game and draw things on the screen to solve puzzles or fight enemies. You wanna cut something, you can draw a slash. You wanna make something bloom, you can draw a circle. It's such a cool, unique mechanic. And the game came out on PlayStation 2 back in 2006, and critics absolutely loved it. Perfect scores everywhere, people called it a masterpiece, it won Game of the Year awards everywhere. Everything pointed to this being a massive hit. And then it only sold like 270,000 copies worldwide by the end of 2007. That's pretty much nothing. It's a full disaster for a game this big and ambitious. The devs did try porting it to Nintendo Wii a year later, thinking maybe Nintendo fans would appreciate it more. That version did slightly better, 600k copies sold, but that's still nowhere near what it should have sold. And now it's probably infamous for being the least commercially successful Game of the Year winner in 2010. Like, that's a record you don't want to have. But then the game eventually released as Okami HD on modern consoles. Xbox One, PS4, Switch, PC, and people finally gave it a chance. And now I think it has sold like around 4 million copies. Took over 15 years, but it finally found its audience. Still, it's pretty wild that a game this good, this beautiful, this creative took that long to get the recognition it deserved. If it had come out today with proper marketing, maybe it would have been a huge hit from day one. Next game I want to talk about is the Saboteur. It's one of those games that I genuinely wish more people knew about because it's so damn cool and unique. This game came out in 2009 and it was the last thing Pandemic Studios made before they shut down, which is sad because they were really a talented studio. But man, what a way to go out. So imagine GTA meets Assassin's Creed but set in a Nazi-occupied Paris during World War II. You play as this Irish race car driver named Sean Devlin who ends up joining the French resistance. The gameplay mixes third-person shooting, stealth, driving, and even some parkour. It's got a bit of everything and it all works really well together. But the coolest thing about the Saboteur is its visual style. When an area is under Nazi control, the whole game goes black and white, except for pops of red, blood explosions. Nazi flags, they're all in this vivid red against a grayscale world. It's striking and immediately tells you where the bad guys are in control. And then when you complete missions and liberate an area, color literally returns to that part of the city in this world. Streets that were drained and gray suddenly burst into full color, the blue sky, the green trees, the colorful buildings. It's such a cool visual representation of freedom returning to Paris. I have never seen another game do anything close to this. But despite being genuinely innovative and fun, almost nobody played it when it came out. It just flew completely under the radar. I think part of the problem was that it came out right at the end of 2009, same time as a million other big releases, and it just got buried. Also, the fact that Pandemic Studios was closing probably didn't help either. There was no marketing push, no post-launch support, no sequel potential. It was a one-and-done situation, and that's a shame because this setting and this gameplay deserved way more. It's only in recent years that people have started discovering it and calling it a cult classic. But by then, Pandemic was long gone and any hope of the sequel died with them. So sadly, another case of a really creative, well-made game that just did not get the attention it deserved. Okay, so you know how every game gets compared to Dark Souls these days? Souls-like, Souls-type, Souls roguelite, whatever. It's gotten kinda tiring, okay? But sometimes those comparisons are actually deserved, and The Surge 2 is one of those cases. This game came out in 2019, and it's set in this dystopian future where rogue robots and machines are everywhere trying to kill you. Classic sci-fi stuff. And yeah, it's got the same challenging combat style as Dark Souls. You're gonna die a lot. You're gonna need to learn enemy patterns, all that good stuff. But here's what makes The Surge 2 different and actually cool. You can target specific body parts on enemies. Like if you see an enemy with a sick weapon or piece of armor you want, you can specifically aim for that part, cut it off, and then craft it for yourself. It adds this whole strategic layer to the combat where you are not just trying to kill things, you are trying to dismember them in specific ways to get the loot you want. The Surge 2 took everything from the first game and made it better. The combat was way more refined with better enemy variety and smarter AI that actually worked together. They added new weapon types, better character customization, and revamped the parry system that made fights feel even more intense. The environments were more interesting too. The first game was mostly industrial corridors, but the sequel opened things up with more variety in locations and level design. It felt like a proper sequel that learned from the original's mistakes. And critics also really loved the game. Reviews were pretty favorable. Folks recognized it as more than just Dark Souls with robots and appreciated the unique limb targeting system and the improvements over the first game. But nobody bought it, like seriously, almost nobody. The game just came and went without making a splash, but the game and the whole series have basically faded into obscurity since then. And that sucks because The Surge 2 genuinely tried to be its own thing. It wasn't just a lazy Souls clone, it had its own identity, its unique mechanics, own style. It deserved better than to just disappear, but I guess in a market flooded with Souls-likes, even a good one can get lost in the noise. The Evil Within 2. This one's weird because the first Evil Within actually did pretty well. It wasn't massive blockbuster or anything, but it sold respectably 800,000 copies in the first week, which is solid for a horror game. So naturally they made a sequel, and the sequel was better than the first game in almost every way. The pacing was improved, the story was more coherent, the gameplay was more refined, the graphics were better. It was a legit improvement across the board. And it sold like 200k copies. Like, what? How does better sequel sell a quarter of what the original sold in the same time period? That does not make sense. Now, to be fair, this was during the transition from physical to digital sales, and these numbers are mostly physical copies, so the digital sales might have been higher than we think, but even accounting for that, The Evil Within 2 clearly sold way less than the first game, and that's a shame because The Evil Within 2 is genuinely great. The only real criticism is that it's not quite as scary as the first game. It's a bit more action-oriented, but in every other aspect, it's better. The semi-open world sections give you more freedom, the crafting system is more fleshed out, and the story is actually followable this time instead of being a confusing mess. I think it's honestly one of the best survival horror games outside of the Resident Evil series. If you're into that genre, it's absolutely worth playing. Nobody really knows why it flawed. Maybe people were turned off by the first game being kinda rough around the edges. Maybe the marketing itself was bad, and Bethesda didn't just push it hard enough. Or it came out at the wrong time, who knows. But the developers did their job, they listened to the feedback and made a better game. Next game is Enslaved Odyssey to the West. Before Ninja Theory hit it with a big title like Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice, they made a bunch of games that had mixed success. But one of their best and most underrated is definitely Enslaved. This game has such a unique setting. It's a post-apocalyptic game, but not in their usual brown and gray way. Instead, nature has reclaimed everything. You got these bright green plants growing over rusted machines and crumbling buildings. It's beautiful, but in a really weird way. You play as this guy called Monkey. The game is loosely based on Journey to the West, and you're traveling through this robot-infested wasteland with your companion Trip. The dynamic between these two characters is really well done, and that's largely thanks to some incredible motion capture performances. The facial animations and body language really bring the characters to life in a way that was pretty impressive for a 2010 game, especially not coming from a big AAA studio. But the problem was that this was a hard sell from the beginning. It was a brand new IP with a really unusual setting and no obvious hook to market it with. Like, how do you pitch this game in a 30-second commercial? It's a post-apocalyptic but colorful game, and you're protecting this woman, and there are robots, and it's based on Chinese mythology. That's not an easy elevator pitch. The game needed to sell at least 1 million to be considered successful, and when it didn't even hit half of that, the planned sequel got canned immediately. And that's a huge shame because there was a real potential here. The world was interesting, the characters were great, and the foundation was solid. Ninja Theory just never got the chance to build it. That's the risk with these kinds of projects though. When you try something different and unique, sometimes it pays off big and sometimes it just does not connect with the audience. Enslaved fell into the later category, unfortunately. Alright, so FreeSpace 2 is one of those legendary games that almost nobody actually played, but everyone who did play it says it's incredible. It's like System Shock 2 in that way, a masterpiece that barely anyone experienced. This game came out in 1999 and for its time it was graphically insane. We are talking about space combat with incredible detail, beautiful nebulas and star fields, realistic explosions and lightning effects, and ship designs that were varied and cool looking across different factions. But graphics weren't even the best part. This was a space combat sim, and dodge fighting was phenomenal. Computer and Video Games magazines literally said it had the best combat of any classic space sim, and I believe it because that scale of the battles was just amazing. You have these massive capital ships in the background like actual giant spacecraft, and they'd be shooting these enormous beam cannons at each other, and if you got caught in one of those beams, well, instant death, just vaporized. It made the battles feel huge and dangerous in a way that smaller scale games just couldn't match. So with all of that going for it, you'd think it would have been a massive hit, right? Well, sadly no. The game came out on September 30th, and by the end of the year, it had only sold like 26,000 copies. That's absolutely terrible. So what happened? Well, space combat sims were kinda dying at that point. They had this reputation for being super complex and hard to learn. You needed a joystick, you had to memorize a bunch of controls. There was a steep learning curve. Meanwhile, first-person shooters were taken out because they were more accessible. He could just pick up a mouse and keyboard and start playing. FreeSpace 2 was caught in that transition. It was an incredible game in a genre that was becoming niche. Casual gamers weren't interested in learning how to fly a space fighter when they just could play Half-Life or Code instead. Well, the good news is this game is still available for purchase today, and there's actually a pretty active modding community that keeps it updated with better graphics and new content. So if you're into space sims, there's no reason not to check it out. It's rated, sure, but it's still considered one of the best in its genre. Okay, Titanfall 2 is probably the most famous example of a great game that got absolutely screwed by bad timing and terrible decisions from its publisher. This is the poster child for what could have been. So, the first Titanfall was pretty good, but it had some issues. Mainly that it was multiplayer only with no campaign. Respawn Entertainment listened to the feedback and came back with Titanfall 2, and they nailed it. Everything about the game was better. The multiplayer was more refined, more balanced, with a better progression system. The movement was still that super fast wall-running parkour-style gameplay that made the first one fun, but it felt even more polished. And the Titan combat was deeper and more rewarding. But the real game changer was the single-player campaign. Respawn added a full story mode and it was fantastic, like legitimately one of the best FPS campaign in years. The level design was creative, the set pieces were spectacular, and the relationship between your character and your Titan BT-7274 was genuinely amazingly emotional. And also there's this one level where you are jumping between different time periods and it's brilliant. Another level has you platforming through a factory while it's building houses in real time around you. The campaign was short, maybe 5 to 6 hours, but it was quality over quantity. Every level was memorable. So with all that, you'd think Titanfall 2 would have been a huge hit, right? Well, here's where EA, the publisher, completely dropped the ball. They released Titanfall 2 on October 28, 2016. Battlefield 1, which is also published by EA, came out on October 21, just 1 week earlier, and Call of Duty Infinite Warfare came out on November 4th, 1 week later. So EA sandwiched Titanfall 2 between two of the biggest shooters of the year. They put their own game up against their other game and Call of Duty. That's insane. It's like they were trying to kill it. And surprise, surprise, Titanfall 2 got crushed. It sold way below expectations. Despite being arguably better than both Battlefield 1 and Infinite Warfare, it could not compete with those established franchises, especially when they were all fighting for the same audience at the same time. Over the years, though, a lot of people have discovered Titanfall 2, especially through the sales, the discounts, and for the single-player campaign itself. But sad thing is, we could have gotten maybe Titanfall 3, 4, 5, who knows by now, but sadly I think the franchise is pretty much dead in the water. Alpha Protocol. Alpha Protocol is such a weird, fascinating game. It's from Obsidian Entertainment, and if you know Obsidian, you know they make RPGs with deep writing, complex quests, and meaningful choices. Games like Fallout New Vegas and Knights of the Old Republic 2. So what did they do with Alpha Protocol? They took all that RPG DNA and shoved it into a spy game. It's basically Jason Bourne meets Mass Effect, and the result is something that doesn't exactly really exist anywhere else. You play as a secret agent and the game has all the usual spy stuff. Infiltrating enemy bases, gathering intelligence, making difficult choices about who to trust, but it also has Obsidian's signature dialogue system where your choices actually matter and affect how the story plays out. The conversation system has a timer, so you have to make decisions quickly, which adds to the tension of the story beats. Now, I ain't gonna lie, Alpha Protocol is janky as hell. The shooting feels kinda clunky, the stealth is hit or miss, and there are bugs all over the place. It's rough around the edges in a lot of ways, but it's also the only RPG that does what it does. Like, really think about it. Can you name another RPG spy game? Well, I cannot. That uniqueness is what makes Alpha Protocol special. It's flawed, but it's trying to be something different, and I really respect that. So, of course, the game sold like under 1 million copies, which is, of course, the publishers saw the poor sales. It hurt the financial performance. They announced there wouldn't be a sequel. Despite the commercial failure, though, Alpha Protocol has this dedicated cult following that absolutely loves it, includes me, honestly. I think people appreciate it for trying something different. It got taken down from Steam for a while due to some licensing issues, but it's back now, thankfully. New players can experience its weird charm. Now, this next one hurts me so much personally. It's Guardians of the Galaxy from 2021. So after Marvel's Avengers turned out to be a total disaster with its live service nonsense and grindy gameplay, I think a lot of people were skeptical when Square Enix announced another Marvel game. But Guardians of the Galaxy, it's actually sick, like genuinely great. Like, this is a single-player story-driven game with no microtransactions, no battle passes, no online requirements, just a straightforward action-adventure game you can buy, play through, and enjoy. Remember when games used to be like that? Yeah, it's pretty refreshing. The game is full of heart and personality. The writing is sharp and funny, the character interactions feel genuine, and there are tons of deep-cut comic book references that fans will appreciate. It's clearly inspired by the MCU movies, but it's doing its own things with the character and story, which I really respect. The levels are well designed, the combat is fun once you get the hang of it, and the soundtrack, oh my god, this game has some of the best music, soundtracks, original tracks, licensed tracks in any of the recent games I have played. They got the rights to use a bunch of classics 80s rock songs. It's just a solid, well-made game that knows what it wants to be. But of course, fucking it sold like fucking crap. The concurrent player count on Steam at launch was only around like 11k, which is extremely low for such a big AAA title. And of course, Square Enix straight up said in their earnings report that the game underperformed and did not meet their sales expectations. So now you ask, why did it flop? Well, I think the biggest reason is that people got burned out by Avengers. That game was so bad and so aggressively monetized that it left a bad taste in everyone's mouth. When Guardians came out, people just assumed it would be more of the same garbage, so they stayed away. The marketing didn't help either. The trailers didn't really capture what made the game special. They honestly kind of made it look a little generic when it's actually got a lot of personality. And I think the character designs looked weird to people who were used to the MCU versions. Now, I don't think we'll ever get a sequel of this. It's a dead-in-water game. Story was really good though. Graphics were amazing. I would say gameplay was 8 out of 10, in my opinion, personally. Now, the next game I want to talk about is Spec Ops The Line. Spec Ops The Line is one of those games that stays with you long after you finish it. It is not a generic military game. It's like an experience, and honestly, it's one that more people need to have. And of course, on the surface, it will look like another generic military shooter game. You're a soldier, you got a team, you're shooting bad guys in the Middle East. It looks like Call of Duty or Battlefield or any other dozen military shooters of it, but instead third person, thank God. But I think that's deliberate by the devs. The game is actually a deconstruction of military shooters and a commentary on violence in video games. It's inspired by Heart of the Darkness and Apocalypse Now, and it gets dark, like really dark. So without spoiling too much, the game makes you question your actions and the actions of these types of games in general. It asks, why are you here? Why are you enjoying this? And it doesn't pull punches. There are scenes in this game that will make you uncomfortable, and that's the point. The writing is really good, the voice acting is top-notch, and the way the story unfolds is masterful. Critics loved it, people who played it were blown away. It's the kind of game people write essays about. But it didn't sell well. The publisher said sales were lower than anticipated, which is corporate speak for this flop, and I get why. If you are marketing this game, how do you sell it? You can't just say, hey, this game will make you feel bad about playing it. That's not gonna move units. They tried to market it as a standard shooter because that's what sells, but the game attracted the wrong audience, people who wanted another mindless action game. They were just disappointed, and people who would have appreciated the deeper themes didn't know the game existed. It's unrealistic to expect a game like this to sell like Call of Duty. They are going for completely different things, but the fact that Spec Ops The Line exists at all is valuable. It's important. It's a game that has something to say and says it well. Now, we are not gonna get a sequel, and honestly, we don't need one. The game tells a complete story and makes its point, but if you haven't played it yet, you absolutely should. I've talked about this game so many times on my channel in the previous videos because it's just that good and that important. It's a ride worth taking, trust me.